Where were you the moment you realized your peace wasn't yours to keep? For me, it was a Saturday morning. The sun had just started kissing the lake's surface with that molten gold shimmer only dawn can offer, and I was nursing a thermos of black coffee on the deck of my old aluminum boat, drifting gently across the water like I had done 100 times before. No noise. No expectations. Just water, birds, and the barely there hum of the outboard motor. Until I saw it. 3 figures on the opposite dock, one pointing, one filming, and one yelling into a bullhorn, like they were staging a coup over the smooth surface of a lake that had no idea it was at war. They called me a trespasser. On my own damn lake. Now tell me, where were you when they told you that you no longer belonged somewhere you loved? Did you back away quietly, apologize, compromise? Or did something ancient flicker to life in your chest, something primal and unshakable that whispered, no, not today? I had bought the land for the lake. That was always the deal. The cabin was quaint, the trees were nice, but the lake, that wide, open mirror of calm, was why I signed the check. It wasn't just about fishing, though that was part of it. It was about solitude, control, escape. I didn't want to be watched. I didn't want anyone telling me how loud my boat could hum, or where I could cast a line. I wanted to disappear from the white noise of a world always reaching into your pocket, your calendar, your peace. And for a while, I got exactly what I paid for. Early mornings became ritual. Coffee in hand, tackle box by my side, I'd drift under the fog like a shadow. Saturday evenings I'd cruise across the surface with a bourbon resting on my thigh, the smell of cedar and old motor oil hanging in the air. It was perfect. It was mine. Or so I thought. The warning signs came soft at first, furtive glances from across the water, pursed lips from women in matching tracksuits, the sort of suburban disapproval that smells like lemon cleaner and performative courtesy. I ignored them. Figured they didn't like the way my 2-stroke engine disturbed their curated morning serenity. Too bad. That lake wasn't a private country club pond. It straddled a line, half on HOA property, half on my independently owned land that dipped right into the water. Their docks looked like aluminum toothpicks, barely surviving the breeze. Mine was real wood, anchored deep, stained every season. You could feel the difference when you stepped on it. Their half of the lake was for show. Mine was for living. Then came the paper. One Saturday, I pulled in a gorgeous 6-pound bass. Tossed it in the cooler, wiped my hands on a rag, and walked up to my truck only to find a sheet of paper tucked under the windshield wiper like a parking ticket. Bold letters screamed unauthorized use of community lake. It was laughable. A fishing permit. For a body of water not even governed by their HOA. They were bluffing. Badly. I crumpled the paper, tossed it in the back of my truck, and told myself it was just one clipboard warrior having a bad weekend. But then came the bullhorn. Next trip out, I'm halfway across the lake, sun shining, minnows flashing under the surface, when a screeching voice slices through the air like a siren. Boat operator. Return to shore immediately. At first, I thought it was a joke. But there they were again, same trio, different dock. One filming. One pointing at a laminated sign. One shouting into a dollar store megaphone. Private community lake. Members only. That's when something shifted in me. It wasn't about the fish anymore. It wasn't about the boat. It was about someone trying to draw a line through the very thing that gave me peace and saying, you don't belong here. I killed the motor. Let the boat drift in silence. I shouted back, calm, legal, surgical. This is my property line. You have no authority over this lake. They didn't care. Bullhorn lady just shouted louder. The camera zoomed in. The sign waved. It was absurd. Surreal. Like watching a bad community theater production of a court drama with 0 rehearsals. I waved. I smiled. I turned the boat and went home. But inside, something had cracked open. That night, I went looking. Dug into old boxes. County records. Zoning maps. Property surveys with dates older than the neighborhood itself. And it was all there, clear, damning, undisputed. The lake wasn't private. It wasn't governed. It wasn't theirs. Half of it sat on unincorporated land. The rest was a patchwork of individual properties, none of which gave the HOA dominion. Armed with facts, I walked into their next board meeting, held at the community pool like some suburban version of the UN, and laid the documents down like playing cards at a poker table. You don't own the lake. You don't manage it. You don't even have authority over fishing permits. I pointed to county maps, survey lines, easement laws. They didn't blink. Beverly, the HOA president with orthopedic sandals and a haircut like a helmet, folded her arms and said with this little smirk, the board has decided the lake is a protected community asset. Decided, like it was a group dinner location. Another man chimed in, red-faced and sweating through a too-tight golf polo. You don't belong here, he spat, as if I was some intruder. More people nodded. Murmurs spread. They printed out a violation form. No signature. No legal codes. Just more arrogance dressed in bureaucracy. And that's when I knew. I could bring every map in the county. I could recite zoning law backwards. I could give them video evidence, signed affidavits, even have a judge on retainer. None of it would matter. Because facts don't beat belief, not when belief is rooted in entitlement. I left without another word. Back home, I stared out at the lake as the sun dipped behind the tree line. My dock looked smaller that night. The water felt farther away. Not because anything had changed physically, but because someone had tried to take ownership of something sacred. And it worked, even if just emotionally. And I hated that. I wasn't mad about the fish, or the boat, or even the HOA. I was mad at the principle. That a group of people who didn't build something, didn't pay for it, didn't even understand it, could point and say mine, and expect the world to fall in line. I'd spent my whole life avoiding that kind of noise. Corporate offices, petty neighborhood politics, performative civility. I had found this place because it was outside the lines. But now the lines were bleeding. That night, I sat on my porch with a bottle of whiskey, staring into the dark water and thinking only one thought. By the lake. Not just for revenge. Not for ego. But for something deeper. For the peace they tried to strip away with paper signs and shrill voices. For the quiet dignity of ownership. For the right to exist without asking permission. Because when someone tries to evict you from your own peace, you don't negotiate. You rebuild. You outlast. You buy the whole damn lake. So tell me, where were you the moment they drew a line around something you loved and told you to step away? Did you? Or did you step closer? The idea settled into my chest like a loaded gun on a quiet table. Heavy, dangerous, inevitable. By the lake. It sounded insane at first. Who the hell wakes up one morning and decides to purchase a body of water just to make a point? But the longer I stared into the black mirror of that lake, the more sense it made. This wasn't about water or property lines anymore. It was about ownership. Not just legal, but spiritual, emotional, existential. They had made it personal, and now I would make it permanent. The next morning I skipped coffee. I needed clarity, not comfort. I drove straight into town, to the county recorder's office, a squat building sandwiched between a payday loan shack and a dry cleaner that hadn't seen steam in a decade. The place smelled like mildew and paper cuts, and the clerk behind the counter gave me the kind of look reserved for tax frauds and conspiracy theorists. But I didn't care. I rolled up my sleeves, pulled up the maps, and started digging. Land records, water rights, zoning plats, tax histories. They were all there, like pieces of an old murder mystery no one bothered to solve. What I found wasn't just promising. It was gold. Turns out, the lake that the Willow Shores HOA acted like they ruled with an iron visor was in a kind of legal purgatory. Technically unincorporated, previously owned by a string of failed ventures. A farmer, a defunct resort company, some investment trust that collapsed after the 2008 recession. And when that trust dissolved, a chunk of shoreline, including the very boat ramps and paths the HOA used, was left dangling, unpaid, unclaimed, unnoticed. The county slapped liens on it years ago. Nobody wanted it. Too soggy to build on. Too remote to profit from. But to me, it was a battlefield waiting for a new king. I didn't rush. This needed precision. I called up Marcus, an old friend of mine from college who now worked for a downtown title company. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but when I told him, vaguely, that I had a land opportunity with a potential title maze, he perked up fast. We met at a greasy diner off the highway, the kind with cracked booths and coffee that tasted like melted pennies. Over lukewarm pancakes, he slid a manila folder across the table. Off the record, he said, there's a bank looking to dump those parcels. They'd probably throw in a handshake and a bottle of wine if you showed up with cash. I asked him for a number. He scribbled something on a napkin. I stared at it. My stomach twisted, but not in fear. Indecision. I'd been saving for a second property, maybe a little beach house or an RV tour up the coast. Dreams that felt childish now. What was a road trip compared to holding power? Not dominance. Not destruction. Just the power to be left alone. The next day I made the call. Full cash offer. No financing. No delays. I wanted it all. Every available parcel touching the lake, every access point, every forgotten strip of land, every weed-choked trail. I even added a buffer zone just to be safe. The negotiations were quiet, clinical, expensive. I hired an attorney to draft the offers, reviewed every deed under a magnifying glass, coordinated with the county to clear the liens. It took 3 weeks and enough legal fees to make a hedge fund manager flinch, but I did it. One by one, the parcels fell into place. By the end of the month, the lake was mine. Official. Stamped. Recorded. Sealed. Irrevocable. The day the paperwork finalized, I didn't celebrate. I acted. I had a local crew bolt aluminum signs every 20 feet around the shoreline. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I chained the boat ramps. Fenced off the trails. Installed motion sensors and cameras camouflaged in the trees. I even filed a new LLC, Lakefront Holdings, just to add an extra layer of legal polish. It sounded cold, professional, unfriendly. Perfect. That same evening, I took the boat out. Same old aluminum shell. Same tackle box. Same thermos. But everything had changed. I was no longer a guest on borrowed peace. I was the landlord of their discomfort. I dropped anchor in the center of the lake and cast my line just as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills. Across the water, I saw them. A small group of HOA residents, clustered at the boat ramp, faces twisted in confusion and disbelief as they tugged on the new chains like spoiled kids, shaking an empty candy jar. One woman pulled out her phone, probably emailing Beverly in a fit of suburban indignation. I waved. They didn't wave back. The emails started the next day. Angry blocks of text in all caps, littered with exclamation marks and veiled threats. Some accused me of theft. Others demanded immediate access restoration. One woman said I was emotionally damaging the neighborhood ecosystem. Whatever the hell that meant. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The sign spoke for me now. The emergency HOA meeting happened the next evening. I didn't attend, but I watched. From my porch, beer in hand, I could see the clubhouse lit up like a war room. Golf carts jammed the parking lot. Arms flailed. Papers waved. Voices carried across the lake like angry geese. A few brave ones marched down the path to my new fence, rattled the gate, pointed at the cameras. I watched. I smiled. I said nothing. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever said. Over the next few days, the fury turned to panic. Rumors flew, some saying I'd sold the lake to a developer, others claiming I was planning to drain it. A few even suggested I was building a private gun range. The more outrageous the theory, the more terrified they became. But I just kept fishing. The same boat, the same smile, the same peace. Except now, that peace had a deed. But the best part, the moment that tasted the sweetest, was yet to come. One morning, as the mist still hugged the surface, I saw her. Beverly, HOA queen, bullhorn in hand, marching down to the fence like a monarch stripped of her crown. Her voice cracked through the cheap speaker. You are in violation of community agreements. You will be fined daily until access is restored. I cast my line, reeled slowly, looked up and shouted, feel free to find the LLC that owns the lake, Beverly. Good luck finding it. Her face, my God, her face. It crumbled. She stood there, lips trembling, eyes darting, the weight of her own overreach crashing down like a broken chandelier. She turned, walked away. No bullhorn next time. No clipboard. Just silence. And I swear, for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Sovereignty. That's what they don't tell you. That peace isn't passive. It's earned, protected, fought for. And once you win it, no one ever gets to take it back. Not with a bullhorn. Not with a memo. Not even with a vote. They had tried to make me feel small, like a trespasser in my own skin. But now they were the ones peering through fences. Now they were the ones looking in. Tell me, have you ever watched someone realize, in real time, that their illusion of control was nothing more than a dream? That their rules only ever applied because people like me let them? That the lake they thought was theirs had been someone else's kingdom all along? If you haven't, let me tell you, it's a beautiful, terrible thing. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. The quiet didn't last. For a brief, shining week, I allowed myself to believe that clarity had finally sunk in, that fences, signs, deeds, and silence had done what reason never could, that even the most stubborn HOA loyalist would know when the battle was over. But peace, as I was learning, isn't a state. It's a phase, a pause, and in some neighborhoods, it's just the eye of the storm. The first warning wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost poetic, a set of footprints in the mud near the southern end of the lake, just beyond the stretch where the trees get too dense for cameras. I noticed them one morning while walking the perimeter, boot prints sunk deep into the soft shore, and a discarded soda can wedged under my dock ladder like a calling card. I stood there staring at it, the early light filtering through the trees, and knew with absolute certainty, someone had been here. Not by accident, not wandering, not lost. This was a message, a test. The next was clearer. A kayak drifting close to my side of the lake, too close, with a teenager inside pretending to fish while occasionally glancing at the trail beyond the trees. When I emerged from behind the boathouse, he nearly dropped his paddle. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply called out, private property. You need to turn around. He mumbled something, maybe an apology, maybe not, and started paddling away without another word. Easy. Clean. But it wouldn't stay that way. 2 days later, a woman in neon yoga pants jogged right through the no trespassing signs with her golden retriever, splashing along the edge of my shoreline like she owned it. I watched from the porch, gave her every chance to notice the signs, the fencing, the multiple laminated warnings posted like a legal minefield. She never slowed down. Never looked. When I stepped onto the grass and called out, She responded with a wave that wasn't friendly. It was dismissive, the kind you give to someone who's overreacting at the grocery store. It's just a path, she said, not stopping. Calm down. That was the moment I realized this wasn't ignorance. It was defiance. They weren't confused. They weren't misinformed. They were refusing to acknowledge that the world had changed, that the rules no longer bent in their favor, that someone had beaten them at their own game. I documented everything. Photos, times, locations. I sent emails to the HOA, complete with timestamps and images. No reply. Not even a passive-aggressive form letter. Just silence. Except on the lake, where the noise was creeping back in. Small boats creeping near my boundary, voices on trails just beyond the fence, laughter that echoed off the water like mockery. I posted additional signage. Installed brighter lights. Added motion-triggered audio warnings that politely reminded trespassers they were being recorded. The trespassing slowed, but it didn't stop. If anything, it became more strategic, coordinated. A paddleboard floating too close during sunrise. A dog leash wrapped around one of my fence posts as if left by mistake. Candy wrappers in the brush. They were probing, pushing, seeing how far they could go before I snapped. I didn't snap. I calculated. When logic fails, when civility is mocked, you go to the next level. You make it official. I called the sheriff's office. Explained the situation. Provided documentation, legal ownership, and months' worth of polite attempts to resolve the matter peacefully. They were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. Unless I pressed full charges, criminal trespassing, property damage, there wasn't much they could do. You've got every right, the deputy told me. But if you go nuclear, it'll get ugly. I wasn't ready for ugly. Not yet. So I played a different card. A smarter one. I drafted a proposal, an access permit system, open to residents who wished to use the lake legally. Reasonable fees. Strict rules. Liability waivers. Posted it publicly on the community board. Sent it by mail to the HOA. No response. No acknowledgement. But the very next day, a new flyer appeared stapled next to mine. No logo. No name. Just bold black text on white paper. The lake belongs to US all. Community rights cannot be bought. I stood there in the morning mist, staring at it. And for the first time since this war began, I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was desperate. They had tried legal pressure. They had tried social pressure. Now they were trying mythology, painting themselves as victims of greed, as defenders of some imaginary communal legacy. It was pathetic, but dangerous, because people believe stories faster than they believe facts. And if you repeat a story often enough, someone will write it down like gospel. That's when the lawsuit arrived. Delivered by courier, thick packet in a full leather binder, the kind of presentation usually reserved for IPOs or inheritance disputes. Civil complaint. Willow Shores Homeowners Association versus Lakefront Holdings LLC. The claims were absurd. Prescriptive easement, community reliance, historic usage. In plain terms, we've used it long enough, so it should be ours. I read every word. Annotated it. Sent it to Clarissa Mayfield, my attorney, and possibly the most terrifying woman to ever wear a pearl necklace in a courtroom. Her reply was short. They're swinging blind. Let's make them regret it. Depositions were scheduled. Evidence compiled. Clarissa unearthed deeds going back 80 years. Surveys with signatures. Tax records proving clear, unbroken ownership. Photos of old no trespassing signs posted long before the HOA ever existed. She built a case so airtight it practically suffocated on its own confidence. The HOA, on the other hand, cracked almost immediately. Beverly broke down during her deposition, at one point shouting, "Everyone knows the lake is community land," then backpedaling when asked if she had ever seen a document to prove it. Carl, the vice president, contradicted her 5 minutes later, admitting he sort of knew the lake wasn't technically theirs but believed it should be, spiritually speaking. Their hired surveyor, a jittery man with ink-stained cuffs, folded under Clarissa's questioning, admitting their maps were preliminary and based more on assumptions than official data. It was like watching a play fall apart mid-performance. Word got out. Fust. The local paper caught wind of the case and ran a headline that made me choke on my coffee. David versus Goliath in Waterside War. Apparently I was David. The HOA was Goliath. Comment sections exploded. Most of the town already resented HOAs. Now they had a villain to root against. When Beverly was quoted saying my boat was visually disruptive to community aesthetics, it went viral. When Carl was caught on a hot mic muttering that most residents couldn't read a plat map if it was tattooed on their face, it hit the evening news. Internally, the HOA splintered. Some members wanted to settle. Others wanted to double down. Rumors of secret votes. Emergency elections. One board member allegedly tried to resign, only to be told she couldn't until the lawsuit ended. I didn't have to do anything. They were tearing themselves apart. I just kept fishing. kept waving to the binocular-clutching retirees hiding behind their garden hedges, kept documenting every absurdity. And somewhere in the quiet between court dates and community meltdowns, I realized something. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about what happens when people who are used to power are finally told no. They don't accept it. They escalate. They invent new rules. And when those fail, they burn everything down just to feel like they're still in control. But me? I had control. I had documents. I had law. And more than anything, I had time. They could scream, sue, boycott, flail. I would just outlast them. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Tell me, have you ever watched an empire collapse not because of outside force, but because it couldn't believe it was no longer in charge? That's what was happening now. Not just to a lake, but to a way of life. And I was there for every moment of it. Rod in hand, eyes on the water, smile on my face. The morning of the ruling felt different. Not in any dramatic, cinematic way, no thunder, no swelling music. Just a stillness, the kind that presses into your lungs and makes every breath feel heavier, like the air itself knows something is about to shift. I dressed like I was going to church. Not because I expected reverence, but because I wanted them to see what dignity looked like on someone they had spent months trying to paint as a trespasser, a problem, a threat. Clarissa picked me up in a rental car, crisp and silent, like everything she touched. She didn't say much on the drive, just flipped through her notes one more time like she was preparing for an academic decathlon instead of a legal reckoning. The courtroom was beige and unremarkable, the kind of place where lives change while the carpets never do. Beverly was already there, flanked by her entourage, posture stiff like a mannequin wired with false pride. Carl sat next to her, visibly sweating through his blazer. A few other residents had come along, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of loyalty, maybe just because their mornings were empty and their egos were full. I nodded at them. None nodded back. The judge arrived 5 minutes late and 5 decades done with everyone's nonsense. He leafed through the paperwork with practiced disinterest, the kind that only people with total authority can afford. Then he read the verdict. It was swift, surgical, and delivered with a finality that echoed louder than any gavel ever could. The HOA had no legal claim, no easement, no entitlement, no argument worth the paper it was printed on. Their case was not only dismissed, but labeled as frivolous, baseless, and a waste of the court's time. And then came the part that cracked the last veneer of control from their faces. They owed my legal fees. All of them. Every dollar. Every hour Clarissa had spent dismantling their fantasy brick by brick. The number was large enough to silence even the most righteous HOA member. They didn't even look at me as the court adjourned. They filed out like ghosts exiting their own wake, stunned, pale, broken in that unique way that only comes from realizing the villain of your story just won the whole damn book. I walked into the sunlight with a weight lifted so cleanly off my shoulders I almost felt taller. But I wasn't done. Winning the lake wasn't the end. It was the foundation. I wanted them to understand that you don't get to manufacture power and expect it to outlast reality. You don't get to weaponize civility and bureaucracy and then cry foul when someone uses actual law to bury your fiction. So I got to work. I called Marcus. I told him I needed signs. Not little ones. Big ones. Industrial grade. The kind that scream authority without raising a voice. Black text on reflective yellow. Private property. No access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I ordered them by the dozen. Had them mounted in concrete. Every 50 feet around the lake. Floodlights installed at each corner, powered by solar panels that made the whole place glow like a warning. I hired private security. Local guys, ex-law enforcement, level-headed, not the rent-a-cop type. They patrolled on rotation, wore body cams, logged everything. I didn't ask them to be aggressive. I asked them to be undeniable. Anyone trying to argue their way in would find themselves gently, politely, and firmly walked back to their side of the fence. Sometimes with a deputy waiting to back it up. Word spread fast. The HOA message board caught fire. Screen grabs made it onto Facebook. Comments poured in from all over town. Some laughed. Some seethed. A few tried to spin the story, calling me a tyrant, a selfish rich man, an outsider with a grudge. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because while they were writing angry posts, I was living a different reality. Every morning, I took my boat out. Every afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched the lake shimmer like it had missed me. Every evening, the fences caught the last of the sun, glowing like a border carved from pure consequence. It wasn't long before the dominoes started falling. Carl resigned first, citing irreconcilable differences in board direction. Beverly tried to hold on, insisted she could restore trust, but no one was listening. Not after the invoices started arriving. The residents, those who had once cheered the ban, who had waved binoculars and muttered under their breath, were now staring at bills for thousands of dollars. Court fees, attorney costs, HOA mismanagement. It all came home to roost, like pigeons finding the one warm place left to shit on. Emergency meetings were called. Arguments spilled into the street. Some families tried to backpedal, said they never supported the lawsuit, that they'd been misled. Others demanded refunds, resignations, blood. Beverly finally posted a farewell message in the HOA Facebook group. No likes. No comments. Just digital silence, the kind that feels louder than shouting. But the most satisfying moment came a few weeks later, when a for sale sign popped up in front of Beverly's house. Then another. Then another. Prices dipped. Realtors whispered. The neighborhood that once tried to erase me from the lake was now trying to erase the memory of their own failure. Meanwhile, my side thrived. I fixed up the dock, stained the wood, added a second bench. I replanted the shoreline with native wildflowers, let them bloom in defiance of all their sterile landscaping. My fishing gear stayed clean, my porch swept, my peace intact. But I wasn't done yet. Not until I closed the loop. I planned a party. A real one. Lakeside. Barbecue. Music. Beer on ice. I invited friends from town. Some family. Even the lady from the county office who'd helped me navigate the paperwork. Invitations were handwritten. Come celebrate a lake reclaimed. No HOA members received one. But I knew they'd hear it. And they did. That day, the laughter carried across the water like gospel. Kids splashed. Old men told stories. Clarissa showed up with a bottle of bourbon and a grin sharp enough to cut rope. Marcus brought his band. We played old country tunes as the sun dipped low and the lake turned gold. At one point, I saw them, HOA diehards, peeking from behind their fences. Faces twisted with the bitter recognition that they were watching a coronation they'd been banned from. One woman, still clutching her clipboard like it was a relic of lost power, stood with a glass of wine she couldn't bring herself to drink. I raised my beer to her. She turned and vanished. Later that night, as the lights flickered off and the last guests drifted home, I took the boat out one last time. Just me, the stars, and the lake. I cast a line into the black, not really caring if anything bit. I leaned back, let the boat rock me, let the cool air kiss my face. And I thought about how close they'd come to stealing something sacred. Not just land, not just silence, but the right to be. And I smiled, because now they couldn't even see the battlefield. Tell me, have you ever seen justice so poetic it felt like a song only you could hear? Because that night, drifting in the middle of a lake they once claimed to own, I heard it clearly. And it was beautiful. The days that followed weren't loud. They didn't erupt in chaos or spectacle. They unraveled. Slowly. Systematically. Like an overstarched curtain finally giving way to the weight of its own self-importance. Willow Shores didn't collapse in fire. It eroded. The HOA, once a fortress of rules, fines, and clip-lawn tyranny, began to crack where it mattered most. Trust. When Beverly's resignation went out, no one responded. Not a single message of thanks or solidarity. Just silence. The kind of silence that creeps in after people realize they've been led into a storm with no shelter. Carl was long gone by then. 2 other board members vanished under the guise of family obligations and unforeseen conflicts. Emergency meetings turned into shouting matches. The Facebook group was a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and badly veiled accusations. Everyone knew the lawsuit had bled them dry. They just couldn't agree on whose knife had done the cutting. But the part that surprised me the most wasn't the financial fallout. It was the spiritual one. For the first time, residents stopped pretending. The ones who once waved from across the lake now avoided eye contact. Joggers rerouted their paths. Families kept their kids away from the water. Not out of law, not out of fear, but out of shame. The lake had become a mirror, and they couldn't stand what it reflected. One evening, I saw a man, I didn't recognize him, standing just beyond the fence on the HOA trail, staring out at the water. He didn't have a dog, didn't have a phone, just stood there quiet. I approached slowly, didn't say a word until I was near the edge. Beautiful night, I said, voice calm, not mocking. He turned to me, startled, eyes wide like I'd broken some invisible barrier. Then he nodded, cleared his throat, and said, "Used to bring my son out here. He learned how to skip stones on this shoreline." I didn't respond right away, just looked at the water, remembering the time I taught myself the same thing, years before any of this madness. "Still can," I said, "but you'll need to ask." He nodded again. No anger, no sarcasm, just resignation. And then he left. That was the shift I noticed most. The resistance had dissolved. The anger replaced by something quieter. Defeat, maybe. Or respect. Or both. Meanwhile, life on my side of the lake moved on. I added a second canoe dock. Installed a few solar-powered path lights. Built a bench facing the western tree line, just where the sun melted each evening into the water like a promise kept. The security patrols scaled back to weekend sweeps. Most of them weren't needed anymore. People got the message. Loud and clear. But I didn't want the story to end in bitterness. Not just. There needed to be closure. Something that didn't just prove a point, but planted a seed. So I started a program. Quietly. No press. No announcements. I called it the Lake Access Initiative. An online application system, independent of the HOA, where residents could request access, schedule time, and sign a personal agreement, respect the land. Leave no trace. No entitlement. Just gratitude. A few trickled in. Cautious, unsure. But I approved every one. No charge. No hidden terms. Just respect. The first family came on a Sunday morning. A father and daughter. Fishing rods in hand. The girl was maybe 10, wearing a bucket hat 2 sizes too big. They fished off the dock in total silence, her feet swinging just above the water, their conversation carried in whispers. They left with a polite nod. No pictures. No fuss. Just peace. And that, more than any lawsuit or sign or judgment, felt like victory. Because peace isn't something you conquer. It's something you protect until people remember what it's worth. I never let the HOA near it again. Not as a group. They'd lost that right. Collectively. But individuals? Individuals could learn. Could change. And if they couldn't, they could stay behind their fences and remember why. Still, not everyone accepted the new order. There were holdouts. Angry letters. Anonymous complaints filed with county zoning boards that were tossed out in minutes. One particularly stubborn ex-board member tried to organize a community reclamation day, which turned into 3 people showing up and getting politely escorted off the property before noon. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every time I sat by the water, beer in hand, line cast into the stillness, I felt it. The quiet authority of someone who didn't just win, but outlasted. Someone who built a fortress not of stone, but of patience, law, and relentless resolve. The final blow came not from anything I did, but from something they couldn't stop. The market. Word had gotten out. Realtors knew. New buyers were wary. Near Lakefront Holdings property became a red flag. Homes sat longer. Prices dropped. Some residents started advertising non-HOA adjacent in their listings, hoping proximity to me would somehow cancel out the neighborhood's reputation. It didn't. Nothing could. The poison was in the soil now. The lake, once their crown jewel, had become a scar. A reminder. And every ripple reminded them of what they lost. But on my side, the lake flourished. Wildlife returned. The reeds grew thicker. A pair of herons made their nest near the north bend. I watched them raise their young from the porch, binoculars in hand, feeling more like a guardian than an owner. I kept to myself. Mostly. Except for the occasional visitor. Friends from town. My brother from out of state. The county clerk who helped me close the final parcel. She brought her grandkids one afternoon to fish off the dock. Laughter echoed across the water like a song I hadn't heard in years. And then one night, with the season changing and the air turning crisp, I took the boat out again. Just me. No rods. No gear. Just a flask, a blanket, and a sky full of stars. I paddled to the center, anchored, and lay back against the cool metal. Let the quiet hold me. No bullhorns. No trespassers. No war. Just stillness. For a long time, I didn't move. Didn't think. Just breathed. And then I whispered, not to anyone, but to the water, to the memory of what had happened, of what had been reclaimed. You're mine now, and I'll never let them take you again. Tell me, have you ever stood your ground so fiercely, so patiently, that the world reshaped itself around your silence? Because I did. And it wasn't about vengeance. Not really. It was about remembering that some things, peace, place, dignity, are worth more than comfort, than approval, than even community. Some things are sacred. And when they come for yours, you don't ask for permission. You buy the lake. You draw the line. And you cast your line, forever beyond theirs.